Where? Okay, we are live. Good evening and hello everyone. Welcome and thank you all for joining us today at our fourth webinar at Testing UI. My name is Guillermo and I am co-organizer of Testing UI. In case this is your first time participating in a Testing UI activity, we are a community in which we promote and share knowledge regarding software testing and quality. We have organized 6 annual conferences. We also organize meetups, and now we have started organizing webinars. For this first webinar series, we have invited our keynote speakers from our past conference editions. So, well, let's get started. We are thrilled and very excited to have Michael Bolton today as our special guest. We have the pleasure to have him at our fourth Testing UI conference edition here in Uruguay. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much, Guillermo. Thank you for inviting me here. It's wonderful.
Thank you, and it's a privilege to have you today. Thanks for joining us. And well, this will be an open session where Michael will answer questions related to software testing. Please write your questions in the live chat panel. We prefer the questions in English, please. And well, we have some questions. We prepare some topics to start, but I think the best is to start with the question of the people. So let's start. I will show the question, and well, then Michael will answer. Let's start with Gustavo.
Okay, Gustavo, you're asking to talk about braiding the stories. I think probably what you're referring to is a blog post that I wrote several years ago, and a slide which shows up in the rapid software testing class, and then a subsequent blog post which I wrote a little bit more recently, maybe it was a couple of years ago. Well, this is interesting because I see a way of reading what's going on in the chat, but I don't see a way of contributing to it myself, which is funny. There's a private chat here too. Oh, chat with other guests. Let's see, with the host and other guests, live comments. There's nothing that I can see on my screen that allows me to supply a reference to it. So maybe what I'll do is I'll put up a reference to it with the wonder and the glory of PowerPoint. But let's have a look at this. I've, for a long time, talked about the idea of testing as being 3 stories, a story that we develop in 3 strands that weave together, that braid around each other. And this came from the idea from James Bach, and we talked about it and we've refined it. And sometimes it's 3.5 stories, sometimes it's 3 stories. But we've got to tell, as we're testing, we've got to tell a story about the product. What it is, what it does. We're telling a story about the product status as we're testing. We're learning about the product. We're performing experiments on it. We're experiencing the product. We are exploring the product, and we're learning things about it. And so we report on that. What it is, what it does, how it works, how it doesn't work, how it fails, how it might fail in ways that matter to our various clients. So that's a story really about bugs. It's a story about problems in the product that threaten its value. And that's the center of it. In other words, when we're telling that testing story, if it bleeds, it leads, because mostly what our clients are asking us for Our clients want to know about problems that threaten the value of the product. That's the biggest deal for us as testers, it seems to me. In order for that story to have a warrant, in order for that story to make sense, in order for that story to be credible and believable, we've got to tell a story about how we've tested. So that's a story about how we set up the product, how we configured, operated, observed, and evaluated the product so that we could learn about it and so that we could tell people about problems in it. How we recognize problems, that's a story about oracles. In rapid software testing, in our way of looking at the world, an oracle is the means by which we recognize a problem when we encounter one in testing. We also, if we're going to talk about how we tested, we want to talk about not only how we recognize problems, but we also want to talk about where we looked. We want to talk about the various platforms on which we stood when we observed the product. Platform has another meaning, which is kind of ambiguous. Let me talk about that as a shelf or a perspective that we stood on, or the perspective that we took when we looked at the product. So, for example, one way we could think about that is we can look at the product in terms of its structure, its bits and pieces, the functions or features that it offers to people, the data that it processes, the interfaces by which we get stuff into and out of the product, the graphical user interface, the API, the command line interface, the printer interfaces, the network interfaces, all the ways in which we can get stuff into and out of the product, the different ways by which we can observe it. Then there's platforms, that is, things on which the product depends, for which the product depends on these things such that if we change something about the platform, the product might fall over like a house of cards. So that, or maybe we can think about platform in terms of our product as a platform, what depends on our product. We can also think in terms of operations, what people do with the functions or features of the product, the circumstances in which they work, the environments in which they work, and who those people are, how they interact with the product, how they get value out of it, how they work with it. And then time. How does time influence the product, and how does the product change or evolve or get shaped by aspects to do with time? Okay, so those are 7 different ways of thinking about the product, 7 different angles that we could look at it from. Those things help us to develop a notion of coverage, how thoroughly we've examined the product with respect to those models. So that's about the testing that we've done so far, and not yet, and won't do. That's just how thoroughly we've examined the product. And I think it's really important for us as testers not just to talk about the things that we have done, but also the things that we haven't. Important testing not yet done. Now, that idea slides into a third idea, a third strand in the story that we're telling, a plot line, if you like, which is a story about how good the testing is, the quality of the testing, why the testing we've done so far is the most fabulous testing we could possibly have done, and also why the testing that we've not done yet might be really, really important, and what got in the way, what's getting in the way of doing that testing. So on the one hand, we've got what testing we've done and what testing we haven't done, and then in reference to the testing that we've done and not done, why the testing that we've done is really, really good, or to the degree that it's not, why it's not. That is the key difference between what we tested and how we tested versus how good the testing was, why we are justifying the testing as being great testing. And with that third level story, with this quality of testing story that we're talking about here, what we're also thinking about is what we would need or recommend in order to make testing go faster, go easier, and the ways in which we could make the testing become more valuable, what we need for faster, higher value testing. Now, those things, you know, there's a little bit of overlap to some degree, but mostly we try to keep those things working together. We try to tell those stories as they relate to one another. So it's not just a 1, 2, 3, you know, first this, then that kind of breakdown of this. We weave these things together. So I want to check with you, Gustavo. Does that help to clear things up? If you could reply in the comments field, which bizarrely I can't seem to contribute to. That's just weird. Yes, as Federico puts it, you're using software. What do you expect? So if anybody has a tip, Guillermo, if you have a tip on how to get me into the comments, I don't know how to do that.
I don't know.
It's just bizarre. Now, maybe just say, chat with the host and other guests. Maybe I can say, hi. And let's see if where that shows up. Does that show up in the live comments? No, it does not. That is just absolutely strange.
Yes.
So one thing we're discovering, you know, Guillermo, I know you wanted to ask about COVID-19 and those sorts of issues around that. Well, one of them for sure is we're finding out how good and how bad webinar software is. Zoom is getting all the excitement. Oh, Claudia has a hint, maybe. Absolutely strange.
May I add something? Yeah, there is a delay from YouTube to StreamYard. So the way of interacting would be the best if Guillermo add the questions in the screen as he did with the one with Gustavo. So
that's a cool feature. Yeah.
So for example, I will add the next one and let's see if that works. For example, the next questions, are you able to see it in the screen?
I am. It says, do you have any story you want to share with us about the developers that learn testing?
Right.
Well, let's see. There are a number of ways at looking at that. It seems to me that the best developers I ever worked with were the developers who bothered to consider an answer to this question: what could possibly go wrong? And that's actually a difficult kind of question for developers to answer to some degree. And the reason for that, I think, is that when we're building something, we have a set of ideas about how we're going to build it, and what we want from it, what we want the product to do. To me, in my own personal experience as a developer and as a writer and as a maker of things, which I occasionally do, it's really, really easy for me to envision what I want from the thing and how things could go right. It's correspondingly harder to figure out how they might go wrong, because that's not what I'm thinking about. Let me illustrate that with a notion of testing questions, and then we'll talk a little bit about how that plays out sometimes. When we're building a product, it seems to me that we've got 4 questions in mind. We've got a question about, okay, do I, as an individual, do we as a group know how we want this thing to work, how it should work? Well, to my mind, that is a process of envisioning success. It's thinking about what we would want in order to figure out and to help us understand what we want for ourselves or what the customer really wants. And that's the most important thing. That is a process of envisioning success. Now, most developers, I think, can wrap their heads around this kind of notion. The question of, are we building what we think we're building? That is a question that I think is oriented towards the discipline of programming. And it seems to me that when programmers get excited about testing, as they kind of did to some degree in the growth and evolution of things like extreme programming and the earliest craft-oriented days of the Agile movement, it seems to me that programmers were most excited about and most interested in this kind of testing, that the testing that helps us with the discipline of programming, to help us discover if what we've just done, the stuff that we're doing or the stuff that we've just done, is reasonably close to our intentions, to what we were asking about in that first quadrant. And that's the kind of testing that involves review. It involves unit testing. It involves unit checking. And there's a sort of a crossover, a sort of overlap that we see expressed when people talk about things like the Three Amigos meetings, and developers and testers and business people getting together and thinking about how we might design and perform testing that can help us to discover what we really want, what the customer really wants, and at the same time, a byproduct of that might include automated checks that developers can run as they're building the product and make sure that what we're looking for is reasonably close to what we intended to do. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes we can get developers to help us with testability and with preparation to get ready to test efficiently when it comes time to do deep testing. That is what we would call the kind of preparation frame, where in the process of building a product, we are considering what we might do to make the product more practically testable. So that crosses over into our intentions, into our designs, and it crosses over into our discipline. How are we organizing the product and the project to make things more amenable, to make things easier for deep testing when it's time to do deep testing? Programmers can sometimes get engaged with that. Programmers love building stuff, so building stuff that allows us to build the product efficiently. Programmers often get into that. There's a fourth question we might want to know about, though, which is, do we know about every important bug? And do we know about every important bug that the customers care about, that the users care about, especially? Bugs that, as we might say, would frustrate the intention for the users of the product, not just the intention of the product that we intended to build in that sense, but what might frustrate the user experience, the aspects by which people get value out of the product as they're using it. Those kinds of bugs can be deeply hidden. They can be rare. They can be emergent. They can be intermittent. They can be platform dependent, and they can be subtle. And it is my experience that those kinds of bugs tend to be outside the heads of the people who are building the product. It is very, very difficult when you're building a product to change your mind from the builder space, the maker space, to the user space, unless you've got a lot of experience with both. Now, I and James just have been experiencing this issue lately. We've been creating exercises for the online rapid software testing classes that we're doing. And now a word from our sponsor. James is doing rapid software testing applied later this month from Washington State. And I'll be doing a rapid software testing explored online class at the end of this month, at the end of June. Okay, end of word for our sponsor. In preparation for doing that, what we've been doing is we've been building exercises and building software. And what's funny about that to us is when we're in developer head, our testing head tends to go away, and we tend to do shallow testing. That's because of the issue of critical distance. When you're building something, it's hard not to focus on the work. And when you're testing something, it might be more difficult to get into the builder's mindset and the builder's head and look at the little tiny details of what's getting built. So our proposed solution for that, our heuristic, for example, you don't have to have dedicated testers on a project. You don't have to. A product can get built without anybody in the role named tester. But here's the deal. If you want somebody who is focused on the job of testing, somebody who is focused on the idea of doing deep testing, focused on being outside of the builder's mindset and more in the user's mindset, or focused on doing long form kind of testing rather than quick, shallow testing that allows us to build more quickly and faster and get faster feedback. If you want somebody to focus on that, it seems to me that it's helpful to have somebody who lives in that role all the time. Yeah, for the most part, I mean, that somebody who's focused on that role. And the reason that we believe in that is because if something is not your focus, you're not going to dedicate time. You're not going to dedicate commitment to it in the same way that you are if it is your focus. So my observation and experience with this is that it's great to get developers involved in the stuff that matters to developers. And that tends to be stuff that's down in the lower levels, the stuff that is oriented towards focus. It is hard, it seems to me, for developers to pick up on the ideas of focusing on the wider space, the space away from the code. And there's another thing too, which is that developers might be able to learn to do some of that to some degree, but it interrupts the fast pace of development. And there's a lot of extra work associated with it that doesn't necessarily feel right for somebody who likes to build products, who enjoys that. So I'm talking about things like processing bug reports from the field, setting up test environments, creating and wrangling test data, designing interesting approaches for testing the product, designing visualizations for data, examining risk and studying problems that other people have had. That's a big job. And it's a job that interrupts, it would naturally interrupt the process of building a product, of engaging with that. So it's not like developers can't learn to do that. It's just that it's hard to shift focus. It's hard to shift mindset. Okay, so I hope that answers your question, Gladys. And then I would ask Guillermo to share some more questions with us.
Yes, let's go with another one. We have a question here related to artificial intelligence. That was one of the topics that we prepared. So it's a question from Brihesh from our meetup group. So we can go with this.
I don't understand the question, to be honest with you. It sounds like a kind of a formulated question. It's I mean, we're asking about stuff that's involved with testing, but it seems to me an apples to oranges kind of thing. They're orthogonal topics. One goes this way and one goes that way. The answer is entirely dependent on context. Let me answer the question in a different kind of way. Let me take it apart and ask two questions. What are the challenges in testing AI? What are the challenges of AI in testing? Let let's break this down into something that I think is really important to think about. And that is, AI is a metaphor. Software is not artificially intelligent. What we're talking about in most cases is a bunch of different kinds of approaches to using software that are different from the kinds of approaches that we've been using in the past. The approach is not procedural. The approach is, in many ways, and I don't want to exaggerate this too much, but in many ways, the idea is to throw a bunch of spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. The idea of using software that through processes that essentially feed back on one another, we use a set of algorithms that kind of refine themselves in order to see what patterns we can see in the data, and to refine algorithms to focus on certain kinds of outcomes that we want to see. And to a great degree, because of the way this stuff is designed, of using feedback, that is to say, sometimes we have a human who says, who tries to tune the algorithm and who tries to get the results that the human wants that way, or where a human trains the algorithm to say, okay, this is a good result, dear AI. This is a result that we don't want so much. Go back and figure out again, give me something closer to the result we like. Well, a lot of the time, the algorithms that are doing this are things that attune themselves and that we therefore don't understand. We don't understand exactly how the machine came up with this answer, but well, it's an answer we like. But there's a mistake, it seems to me, in thinking of that as intelligent. Now, of course, one of the reasons that we think of that as intelligent is because it looks intelligent, it's kind of cool, and it seems to learn patterns that we direct it to learn. But here's a problem with that. If we don't understand how the machine comes to this answer, there's a risk. And the risk is that it will come to an answer that we don't like when we give it some data, or when we give it some new patterns that it's not tuned for, not perfectly suited for. Now, there are examples of this, and it's fascinating because humans respond much better to this kind of issue than the machines do. Take the rules of Go, or take the rules of chess, and change them in a little tiny way, and humans will immediately be able to adapt to that. For machinery, it has to be retrained and tuned right from the get-go, right, to start itself up again from the ground up. We can't say to the machine, okay, well, what happened if we changed it in this little way and have it expect to follow the same rules? So the mistake that people make, I think, when thinking about artificial intelligence is, all right, we don't understand how human intelligence works. So we know that to be intelligent, though, or we believe it to be intelligent. And we don't understand how artificial intelligence works. But just because we don't understand it doesn't mean that it's necessarily intelligent. So the challenge that we've got is that the outcomes are that we're going to see from our product are not necessarily deterministic in the ways that we're used to seeing. And that means that we have to really turn up the knob of critical thinking when it comes to this. Because here's the deal. Many people will tell you that artificial intelligence is only as good as the data that it's been trained on, but it's also only as good as the trainers. Okay, so the questions I have to ask are, who's training it? By what means are we evaluating the quality of the output that we're getting based on the input? That's one big problem. Another big problem that we've got in testing AI applications, Jason Arbon, for example, gave a wonderful example of this at a talk that I saw him give, where the results of an AI were compared to results that they get from the Mechanical Turk on Amazon. That is, humans who've been hired to make evaluations of stuff, and it's sort of like a great big opinion poll. Well, what Jason pointed out was a lot of the time what you're getting is people who are sitting on couches or on chairs in basements someplace, maybe in their mother and father's place. What's the demographic from which we're getting the evaluation of the quality of the output of the AI? Who are the people who are making the decisions about this? Who is the locus of interpretation, as Harry Collins would say? Who is deciding whether this is a good result or not a good result? Second thing we have to consider is, what is the quality of the data that's going in? A lot of the time in the kind of AI that I worked on last year, which was a time series frequency data, the problem that we've got is that data comes in all kinds of different formats. We were looking at analyzing a machine learning analysis of brainwaves. And they were designing an application for a specific purpose, trying to figure out how people are noticing things and how that's registering in the brain. But the trouble is, the sample data that they've got for this stuff, the training data and the testing data that they've got for it, comes in all kinds of different forms. For example, the samples might be taken every 1/5 of a second or every 1/10 of a second. The electrodes by which we're reading the brain waves may be placed at different places in the brain. There's some spurious data sometimes. The electrodes are extremely sensitive and they can be disrupted by things. So one of the things that we have to do is we have to decide, how good is the data that we're putting in? How consistent is it? And my understanding from dealing with the researchers on this project was that the data is often a mess. You probably know that from your own experience if you've dealt with crowdsourced data. Ever gone to that restaurant that looks like a good recommendation? You're on some, you're using some recommendation system, Yelp or TripAdvisor or something like that. Gone to a new city and asked yourself, okay, where do I want to eat? And you choose a category and you look at the reviews and, oh, well, that looks good. You go to a place where the reviews look good and you get there and the place is closed. Or the place is, the address is wrong. Crowdsourced data is a great example of that sort of stuff. And here's the deal. The machinery is unable to determine the quality of the data on its own. It has to be, I would argue, put through some human filters. That's one kind of problem. Another kind of problem is machinery can't make sense of stuff because it's not a social agent. Machinery hasn't lived in the social world. For example, a wonderful talk I saw from a guy in New Zealand at one point. I don't think he was from New Zealand. The talk was in New Zealand. But he put it in a really wonderful way. We as humans apprehend the world, make sense of the world in different ways from the way that machinery does. As he put it, we train an AI to see an image of a dog and to decide, okay, this is a dog and this is not a dog. But he says, as humans, we understand what dogs are like. We think of a dog in terms of the tail wagging, of the barking. We think of the tail, or we think of the dog as something that's affectionate towards humans. But the machine never sees that. The machine sees a string of bits, and that's all it sees. It doesn't have any social context. It doesn't have any awareness of dogs. It doesn't have any real knowledge about the dog. It doesn't have intelligence about the dog. So let's remember this. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are metaphors. They're metaphors. All right. I've ranted long enough about testing of AI. Let's talk about AI in testing. You know, let me be really, really blunt about this. I'd be a lot less concerned about artificial intelligence in testing and a plead to the testing and the development and the management community to put more real intelligence into testing. Too often it seems to me that testing is not focused on really, really important stuff. Testing is not focused on this fundamental question: is there a problem here? How can we examine this product and ask ourselves about a problem? So let's put things into this particular perspective. When I'm testing, I'm thinking about, is there a problem here? I'm also thinking about and asking my clients, are we okay with all this? Is everybody who's observing the product and observing the problems that I'm encountering with testing the product, is everybody all right with that? Well, I am pretty skeptical about how AI is a natural win with this sort of thing. But one reason I have to see something to worry about is in the idea that AI actually helps in any kind of meaningful way with testing. I have not yet seen an AI application that can do these kinds of things in a helpful way. Think critically about what would constitute a problem and whether the product is okay or whether the product is not okay, and why, in ways that matter to people. Once again, machinery is not a social agent. I would worry about the fascination that management and developers and testers, for that matter, have had for a long time about the idea, if only we could just have some magic wand that will, we put a program into this other program, and this other program spits out a version of the first program with all the bugs gone. This has been a magic trick that people have wanted to do at least since the 1960s, and it's still every bit as much of a magic trick. What I think we need, more than application of AI in testing, what we need is a much better notion about how tools can help us with testing, but how tools can only help. They cannot replace testing. So one of the bigger problems that I see with AI in testing is this crazy desire that people have to wave a magic wand and to make all our testing problems go away. Very few people have told me in any kind of meaningful way how AI can actually help with that process. They're welcome to show me, but bring it on. Let me see something that is going to help, because right now all I'm seeing is stuff that says, oh, look, we can press buttons at rates and we can find out if there's a 404 there. Well, there's lots of tools that can do that without resorting to AI, for heaven's sakes. That's a fairly straightforward procedural thing to do. I don't want to test a product by pressing buttons at random. I want to test products by interacting with them with the object of gaining actual experience with them. I want to learn about the product. I want to understand the product. I want to develop ideas about risk. I want to develop ideas about how things could go wrong. Most of what I see in terms of artificial intelligence is something that finds buttons on the screen and presses them all on its own. But what's that doing really? That's automating data entry. That's automating clicking and typing. It's not automating anything to do with identifying risks and problems that might matter to people. By stirring the pot and randomizing stuff, well, we've always had stuff that can randomize. I don't see it. I don't see how it's going to help. All right. Now, by the way, I should offer a couple of references there. There's some books. See, everybody's really enthusiastic about reading stuff that talks about how exciting AI is. And when it gets to the specifics, they're not very good at it. So here's a book that I'd recommend. Have a look at a book called The Master Algorithm. And the author's first name is Pedro, I believe. I forget his last name. And I was looking at that in November of last year. I want to look at it again. It seems to be a pretty intelligent book that outlines the 5 different kind of main flavors of AI and how they might get put together to do useful things. So that's a positive kind of notion. But I think it's also important for us as testers, especially, to read books that are critical of AI. That's our job. Our job is to be critics. So first recommendation is a book called Artificial Unintelligence by a woman named Meredith Broussard, who is a journalist and a data analyst. She is a programmer to her in her own right. And she teaches people how to perform journalism, which is very closely related to testing, of course, and how to think about how we might use data analysis in order to help us understand patterns. That's a pretty cool thing. But she is also appropriately skeptical of that. Another book, whose the name of the author escapes me here too, I'm afraid, is a book called Automating Inequality. As technologists, all the way along, we have run the risk of entrenching in our models of software and our models of how the world works. We've been entrenching things that preserve the existing state of things. And all we have to do is take a glance around the world right now, especially in the United States these days, and have a look at how the existing systems are unfair, unjust, how they entrench certain interests at the expense of other interests. We need to take an ethical and moral take on these things, and we have to understand how technology might influence that. Third book that's really good to read on this subject is a book called Artificial Intelligence, a book by Harry Collins, who is a great a sociologist of science, a great examiner of expertise, and he's been thinking and writing about artificial intelligence for nigh on 30 years now, at least. So he's been a great student of that stuff, and he is the person more than anybody else for me who has underscored the importance of social forces in the way we think about artificial intelligence and how AI is not a social agent, and that's the problem that machinery in general has. The last book I'd recommend on the subject, so I think we're up to 4 or 5 now. The fifth book I would recommend on the subject is a book called Rebooting AI by Ernest Davis and Gary Marcus. I found that book to be really delicious and really delightful because it talks about lots of interesting ways in which our models of how AI works and the ways in which we can be fooled by it can distract us from problems in it. That's a really cool and interesting book. And it talks about some of the big problems that AI has in terms of the difference between strings of bits, which is all AI ever processes, and actual, real, human, social experience. The difference between bit analysis and actual intelligence. Okay, done with that topic. Guillermo.
Thank you. And well, we can move to another topic. Here we have this question related to new testers in the field.
What's the one thing I've learned over the years that you'd given to a new tester in the field? I guess one thing I've learned is it's a bad idea to give anybody one piece of advice and one piece of advice only. So there's that. A lesson I've learned that I'd suggest to them to watch out for. Well, let's see. Let me offer this. Whatever else is true, your testing has to make sense for you. It has to make sense in your context. It has to be your own. It has to be something that is influenced by others and that is at the same time independent of others. It is important for a tester to be an independent thinker. In service of this central question of testing, which seems to get swept by in a lot of advice about testing. It seems to get swept under the rug. The reason that we're testing, it seems to me, both as having been a program manager and having been a tester, having been a developer, what do people want from testing? What people want from testing, I believe, is an answer to this question. Are there problems? Are there problems that threaten the value of the product to people who matter? Important question. Much of what I see about testing these days, it seems to me, and I'm sort of quoting and sort of building on things that my colleague James Bach has said. Most of what I'm seeing these days appears to be an elaborate conspiracy to make sure that nobody actually gains experience with the product. We've got testers who are being persuaded that testing is about the build process. The testing that matters is the stuff that's in, we're getting Jenkins to wax the cucumber somehow or other. We've been getting testers involved in the idea that, what we really need to do is we need to shift left, and that we need to be involved in those meetings where we influence the design of the product. I'm a little bit nervous about influencing the design of the product, but I am happy about the idea of helping people to recognize that it's important to design the product in a way that renders it friendly to testing. So in that sense, I'm kind of okay with it. But as a tester and as a programmer, what I'm really concerned about is not so much does the product work the way we think it works, does it matter to the people who are going to end up using it? We've got to, and it's not that those things are unrelated. It's just that the emphasis that I'm seeing these days is let's do everything we can to avoid actually interacting with the product. And here's what I would suggest testers do. I would suggest to new testers, your big job is to immerse yourself in the world of the people who are going to use the product, not just the world of the people who are building it. We're doing a sort of okay so-so job at that these days. But immerse yourself in the world of people, in how the people who are going to use the product actually will use the product. And one way you can do that, it seems to me, is to get closer to the customer and to raise to management as an issue anything that slows you down or that gets in the way of that. If you don't have access to actual customers, beg for it. If you can't do that, at least go online and look how actual people are talking about your product or about products that are similar to that, and feed that into your testing. Get close to the customer support people. A lot of testers, a lot of really good testers come from customer support, and I think that works as well as it does because customer support people who have interaction with the customer have actual experience with the kinds of problems that customers have problems with. They have insight into that. So get close to those people and work closely and collaboratively with them. Learn about the businesses and the jobs that people are actually doing with the software, and to the greatest degree possible, observe them doing that in that world. And the other thing is, don't think that you know that without testing that. In other words, a lot of testers have this idea, the customer would like this or the customer wouldn't like that. And what they really mean is, I would like this or I wouldn't like that. But remember that the people who are using your product have certain kinds of expertise that you don't have. But you haven't been doing the jobs that they're doing. For example, if you're designing a banking application, I bet you've not been a bank teller, or I bet you haven't been a quantitative analyst for a bank, or you haven't been somebody who's involved with the sort of logistical things like that. That's okay. But what you must develop as a tester, it seems to me, is what Harry Collins would call interactional expertise. That means being able to speak the language of that domain without necessarily being able to perform in that domain, without necessarily having the expertise you need to contribute to the advancement of that domain. So, as an example of that, my friend Alexander Baudouin tests software and to some degree hardware systems for flight simulators. Now, he's really, really well positioned to do that because he's a former pilot. He's been a commercial pilot, and that makes him, in many ways, ideally suited to the business of flying an aircraft and to determining whether the simulator is providing an actual experience that's close to what the pilot experiences in the wild. Okay, I'm never going to have that. Because I did not start in my 20s as a pilot. I've never piloted a plane. So if I'm going to test that stuff, I have to do deep immersion into the world of pilots and what pilots do if I'm going to test it effectively. So I'm going to have to learn an immense amount. I'm going to have to do a lot of reading, interviewing. If possible, I want to sit in the simulator with a trained pilot, with a skilled pilot, and work with them really closely and collaboratively. So this was a notion that came about in the earliest days of Agile, which is get the customer on site or get onto the customer's site. Now, a lot of testers will tell me accurately that, oh, we can't do that. We don't have access to that. Well, every single stand-in that you can develop for that, that's really, really important. So, as I said, talking to the customer service people, going out to meetups when we can go out again, going out to meetups or going out to meetings. In some ways, it's easier than it used to be. Webinars and online chats and so on that are focused on that domain. And when you go into that, you'll be confused. They'll be speaking this weird jargon and this weird language that you don't understand. That's okay, because that's how we learn stuff. We immerse ourselves in these worlds. So try doing that to the degree that you can. When management pushed back and said, no, we just want you to test, and we want to, we don't want you doing that sort of thing. That takes too much time. Well, yes, but how much time does it cost when we don't do the testing that we need to do, when the testing isn't focused on the right kinds of risks? So if you're getting pushback on that issue, make that part of your level 3 testing story, the story of the quality of your testing. What's getting in the way of making tester harder, or what's making testing harder or slower? What's getting in the way of making testing faster, easier, and more relevant, more valuable? Speak up about that. So I guess, Mike, if you want one, that's my one thing today, the one piece of advice that I would give to a new tester in the field, which is make sure you're immersing yourself in the world of the user and developing that interactional expertise so that you can speak the language of the user and understand things about their world and their form of life without necessarily being a practitioner of that form of life yourself. All right, who's next and what's next? It looks like we have about 4 minutes in the official time left. I'm willing to go a little bit longer if other people are, but what else can we do?
Okay, here we have another question from Federico.
What's your process for researching and writing about a topic? Oh, my goodness. Holy hell. Well, I don't know if I'm the best positioned person to answer this question because, Federico, you're a real doctor. You got the PhD. I don't have the PhD. And so you would have enormous insight about that I would know. But I'll tell you what I tend to do. My process for researching and writing about a topic involves a bunch of interrelated things. Number one is I survey the field. I try to get close to people who are doing it, and I try to reach out to people that I can recognize as experts. Now, some people are nervous about that. Some people say, oh, gee, this person is, they're a famous writer, they do conference presentations and stuff, and I'm just a tester, and maybe they're
No,
no worries, okay. So they say, they get kind of nervous about that. Here's something that I've done over and over and over again, and it's remarkably successful in terms of trying to get access to people who are outstanding in some sense in their field. I write to them, or I contact them in some way on LinkedIn or in email if I can get an email address, or if I can get any kind of public access to it. I ask them, and about half the time, at least half the time, they answer. And they usually answer in this way. They say, it's so nice to hear about it from somebody who's interested in my work. That's how I got started with testing itself. Ken Kaner came to Quarterdeck, a company that I was working at. And when I decided I didn't want to be a program manager anymore. I wanted to go into programming. And I was also interested back into programming to some degree. And I was also interested in, because of Ken's class, I was really interested in this business of testing. So I reached out to him, and he answered, because there's rarely anything more flattering to somebody, rarely anything that makes them feel better than the idea that somebody is interested in the thing that they've committed their lives to, in the thing that they're working on. And the reason that they're famous, or the reason that they're prominent somehow, is because they want people to know about this stuff. So it's an honor in a lot of cases for them to be asked. So let's do that. Let's reach out to people and go to important people in the field and ask them what they think. That's something that I do when I'm writing or researching about a topic. So, for instance, my access to Harry Collins was based on the fact that I read a couple of his books, and I was interested in what he did, and I wrote to him. I asked him to be a keynote presenter at the Eurostar conference in 2013. And since then, we have become friends. I've had the honor of having dinner with him several times. All you have to do is ask. Of course, an important way to add to that is to do your homework, to research the topic, to read about it, to observe what people are saying about it in the world, and to reach out to those people. Another tip is to I got this idea from Jerry Weinberg. If you want to learn about something, a great way to do it is to try to write about it. Try writing about it, or try talking about it with other people, and get feedback from people who are good at that topic, and they'll steer you in the right direction. In terms of writing blog posts or articles about testing, I'm really slow at doing that. I'm really slow at putting together articles that I feel are fit for publication. And the reason I'm slow about it is because I'm writing a bunch of stuff that in many ways is unfit for publication. That is, a lot of it comes from conversations with people in online forums of one kind or another, Slack channels and LinkedIn and stuff like that, on Twitter. That's where I tend to get my best ideas for writing, and that's where I get to practice expressing those ideas in little ways that don't represent the same kind of commitment that a blog post or an article would represent. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm practicing writing and talking about the topic, and I'm learning about ways to do that. And then there's all that other stuff that I mentioned about. To the degree that I can, I try to immerse myself in the world of people who are doing that stuff. I'm going to be a lot better about writing about programmer level testing of JavaScript, because I've been doing JavaScript programming lately, and I've been seeing the ways in which JavaScript can bite me. I'm going to learn a lot more in the very near future about version control stuff. It's stuff that I used to be not too bad at, and that I've let that slip, and now I'm going to bring that up, and that will contribute to writing about DevOpsy sort of stuff, because I'll have practice at swimming in my own pools of failure. And that helps a lot. That is a very engaging and invigorating way of writing about topics and writing about those sorts of things from my experience. So yes, great question, Federico. And my challenge to you is, since you're good at it, you must be good at it because you're a PhD. I would urge you to write some posts in English, please, as well as in Spanish, that point us in that direction, because that would be super, super helpful. There is one other book, and I don't think it's in my bookcase right now because I think it's downstairs at my bedside. But I got a lot of great ideas about how to do research, not by reading books on testing, but by reading books on qualitative research. A lot of the time when you read a qualitative research design book, you could take research and just substitute, /s, research /testing and you'll get great ideas about how to not only research about writing testing topics, but about how to prepare for researching a product, for investigating a product. Qualitative research books have been really cool about that. There is one right here. Where are you, Kirk and Miller? This right here is a really, really cool book about that. In terms of ideas on writing, I found this book helpful, and I want to read it again pretty soon too, because I'm working on that. That's Weinberg on Writing, Jerry Weinberg's stuff. Why was Jerry so smart? Why did he know so many things? I think one big reason, he very often said, if I want to learn about something, I decide to write a book about it, and that gets him immersed into the world of that topic. What else have we got?
Thank you, Michael. I think we don't have more time. And, well, it has been a pleasure to have you here again with us. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today.
I'd like to say, Guillermo, first of all, thank you to you and to the Testing Hoy group. The trip down to Montevideo was one of the pleasures of my life. It was just absolutely terrific. With apologies to any vegetarians who are listening, I ate a lot of meat in Montevideo, and I just had a wonderful time from your hospitality. And so I want to say thank you for that and for setting up this event. I think you've got a terrific community down there. And I hope when all this trauma is all over that I get a chance to visit again. It was just a delight, and it's always wonderful to work with you, Claudia, with Federico, with you, Guillermo. It's just, it's wonderful. And I hope we keep in close touch. And I want to visit Montevideo or somewhere close to that again sometime soon.
Yes, of course.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael, again.
And one more thing. Any more questions? Let me know. Drop me a line. You know how to reach me. I am michael@developsense.com. And I'm happy to hear from anybody by any means. Okay, now I'll shut up and let you go.
No, it's fine. Thank you. And, well, thank you, everyone. The next webinar will be next week with Lisa Crispin. And, well, thank you, Michael. See you all soon, and keep safe. Que tengan buenas noches y nos vemos. Gracias.
Adiós.